Have you ever watched your entire life, everything you fought for, begin to slip through your fingers, and there's absolutely nothing you can do? Morning stretched its arms over Ashmore Valley, draping the farmland in soft golden light. But serenity can be deceptive. Sometimes, silence is the breath before a storm. Silas Everwood stood barefoot on the porch of the only home he'd ever known. 30 years of work had sculpted his hands into rough maps of labor, of love. He didn't flinch at the sound of tires crushing gravel, but his heart did. A black luxury car, foreign and gleaming, like a knife in sunlight, tore across the dusty path, disrupting the rhythm of everything that had once felt safe. "Dad, who's that?" Rowan Everwood appeared behind him, apron dusted with flour, the scent of rising bread still clinging to her hands. Before an answer could form, the door of the Bentley swung open, and a man stepped out, as if he owned the earth he stood on. Not just confident, calculated. Dorian Vale, immaculately dressed, exuded a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He didn't greet them, he assessed them, like a merchant inspecting inventory. "Mr. Everwood," his voice didn't wait for a response. "I trust my legal team made the timeline clear. You're almost out of it." Silas blinked, pain flashing behind his eyes. "This land. My family has bled into this soil for generations. Surely there's a way. There was, Dorian cut in, his tone flat, checking the time on a platinum watch. "The bank passed your debt to my firm. You've got 30 days, or $2 million, whichever you find first." His hand gestured toward the fields, the barns, the home. "This operation? It doesn't fit with what I have planned." Rowan's stomach twisted. She'd returned here 6 months ago, after burying her mother, leaving behind her rising career, her dreams, just to help save this place. And now, this man, this outsider, was threatening to erase it all. She stepped forward, every inch of her trembling with fury she refused to show. "So tell me, what grand vision do you have for Ashmore?" Dorian turned at her voice, noticing her for the first time. "Another golf course? Another glass box of a resort?" she went on. "Because God knows the world needs more playgrounds for the rich." His eyes narrowed, intrigued now. "And you are, Rowan Everwood?" she answered, her tone sharp but steady. "And I will not let you pave over my family's story for a line on a spreadsheet." A slow smile formed on his lips. Not kind, curious, bold words. From someone standing on land that no longer belongs to them. "Not yet," she replied, stepping closer. "And maybe never, if I have anything to say about it." "Rowan, enough," her father murmured, fear and fatigue mingling in his voice. But Dorian held up a hand. "No, let her finish." He studied her again, really studied her, like a man seeing something he hadn't expected to find. "Passion," he said quietly. "It's rare, beautiful, even." Then, with a flick of his gaze back to the farmhouse, "J'aime," he added, "but it doesn't change the math." And right then, standing on a porch worn by memories, facing a man who measured life in dollars, Rowan made a silent decision. She would do whatever it took to protect this land, even if it meant making the most dangerous proposal of her life. It was reckless, maybe even ridiculous. But sometimes, the heart speaks before the mind can intervene. "What if I offered you something worth more than this land?" The words slipped from Rowan's lips like a secret too heavy to carry. The moment they left her, she knew there was no turning back. Dorian arched a brow, the corner of his mouth twitching in bemusement. "I run multi-billion-dollar ventures, Miss Everwood. Be careful not to waste my time." Rowan's pulse thundered in her ears, but she held her ground. 3 months. That's all I'm asking. Let me prove to you why this place matters." She took a breath that felt like it might break her. "If I can't, I'll give you everything you came for." Behind her, Silas inhaled sharply, the sound like a crack in the silence. But Rowan didn't flinch. She stared straight into Dorian's eyes, refusing to waver. For a moment, the world stood still, caught in that fragile space between challenge and choice. Then, slowly, Dorian smiled. It didn't quite reach his eyes. 3 months is a long time, Miss Everwood, he murmured. What exactly is in it for me? Rowan hesitated, the weight of what she was about to say anchoring her where she stood. She spoke quietly, but clearly. Me, in marriage. The words dropped like a stone into water, sending ripples no one could ignore. Silas's voice cut through the air like a whip. Rowan, have you completely lost your mind? She was already pacing, her hands shaking just enough to betray her calm. It's not a real marriage, Dad. It's business, she said, as if that somehow made it less absurd. At the window, the last rays of sunlight bathed the land in amber and sorrow. Think of it like a merger, she whispered. Silas sank into his chair, hollowed out by disbelief. My daughter is not a bargaining chip, he muttered, and this land isn't for sale. Not in love, not in pride. Rowan turned toward him, her voice breaking, but her spine unbending. Do you remember what Mom used to say? Sometimes, to find heaven, you have to walk through fire. Before he could answer, the sound of tires on gravel turned all their heads. Through the glass, they saw the black car return, but this time it wasn't alone. A second vehicle, sleek and shadowed, rolled in behind it. Rowan's breath caught. He's back. And he hadn't come alone. From the Escalade stepped a woman whose sharp suit and sharper gaze said everything her silence didn't. A tablet rested in her hands like a weapon she was ready to wield. When Rowan opened the door, Dorian was already standing there, calm and unreadable. Miss Everwood, he said with a faint nod, this is Ms. Evelyn Crane, my attorney. I believe we have an arrangement to formalize. Inside, Evelyn spread documents across the old wooden table like blueprints to a life no one had expected. Her words were precise, clinical, a legal union, temporary, 1 year in duration. All claims to Everwood Acres will be suspended during that time. She pushed her glasses higher on her nose. In return, Miss Everwood will reside at Mr. Vale's estate and attend functions as his wife, as needed for professional appearances. Silas stood, color rising in his cheeks. Absolutely not. Rowan, this is madness. But it was Dorian, surprisingly gentle, who answered him. I understand how this must look, Mr. Everwood, but consider the alternative. The foreclosure is already in motion. Within weeks, there'll be nothing left to fight for. He didn't sound like a man delivering an ultimatum. He sounded, somehow, like someone offering mercy. Rowan sat in stunned silence as her world began to reshape itself. This wasn't just a deal. It was a pact with the devil signed not in blood, but in heartbreak. And yet, as she looked into Dorian's unreadable eyes, a strange flicker of something else stirred inside her. Hope? Or the beginning of a storm they were both too stubborn to see coming. There was something in his eyes that stopped her. Rowan searched Dorian's face for the usual mockery, cold strategy, condescension, but instead, she found something else. Something quieter. Respect. Maybe even a trace of reluctant admiration. You're holding something back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. If you wanted to take the farm, you could have done it already. Why agree to this arrangement? For the first time, the mask he wore so flawlessly slipped. Let's just say I have my reasons. Before Rowan could press further, Evelyn Crane, still poised like a steel trap cut in smoothly, Mr. Vale's public image has become challenging. A softer narrative would benefit certain ongoing ventures. Rowan turned to Dorian, eyebrows raised. So I'm the hometown heroine in your redemption arc? She asked, half laughing, half aching. A charming PR illusion? Dorian's gaze didn't flinch. "You're a solution," he said plainly. "You get to save your land. I get to repair my reputation. No lies, no illusions. We both walk away with what we want. And after a year, we part ways," he replied. "Cleanly. You'll have your father's farm back, at a nominal cost. I'll have softened the headlines." But then his voice dropped. "There's one condition. It has to feel real, to everyone watching. No one can suspect it's a transaction." Rowan felt the floor of her world shift beneath her feet, as if the very foundation of who she was, this farm, this family, was slipping through cracks she couldn't mend. She looked past the contracts and the lawyers, beyond the cold logic, and her mind wandered to early mornings in the east pasture, riding bareback with wild laughter, to her mother's warm hands guiding hers through soft dough, flour dusting their noses, to the ghosts of generations who had lived and loved on this land. "I'll need to keep helping my father," she said at last, her voice quiet but firm. "Weekends," Dorian countered. "During the week, you'll be in the city with me. I expect you to be present, visible. And I keep my job," she added. "I'm a chef. That doesn't change." He gave a half smile. "Actually, that makes the story even better." Evelyn, ever efficient, cleared her throat. "If we're in agreement, the ceremony will need to happen swiftly. Ideally this weekend." "This weekend?" Rowan echoed, startled. "There's a gala in 2 weeks," Dorian said briskly, slipping back into his business tone. "Having a wife at my side by then will be optimal." That night, after the contracts had been signed and the strangers had gone, Rowan sat alone on the porch swing, wrapped in starlight and uncertainty. She tilted her face toward the sky, toward the same constellations her ancestors once followed through planting seasons and long winters. Footsteps approached. Silas sat beside her, 2 glasses in hand. "Your mother would either be horrified or quietly proud," he said, offering her one. Rowan took a sip, the burn of the whiskey grounding her. "What would you do if you were me?" she asked. Silas didn't answer right away. Then he reached out, gently squeezed her hand. "Everwoods don't break promises," he said, "even when they make them to the devil." He smiled faintly. "But we don't give away our souls either." As the night settled around them, like an old familiar quilt, Rowan closed her eyes. She made a silent vow. She would enter this marriage with open eyes, a guarded heart, and her dignity intact. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Dorian Vale had made a quiet vow of his own, a promise even he didn't fully understand. And the wedding? It would be nothing like the stories she used to dream about. There was no white dress flowing in the breeze, no old barn strung with wildflowers, no friends from childhood waiting with laughter and petals in hand. Instead, Rowan stood inside a sterile Manhattan courthouse, the hum of city life muffled by thick glass and thicker silence. She wore a sleek cream dress, elegant, unfamiliar, delivered that very morning by Evelyn Crane, along with a curt note that read, "Media will be present. Look the part." Beside her, Dorian Vale stood in a tailored charcoal suit, every inch the unshakable tycoon. His face betrayed nothing as they recited words that didn't feel like promises so much as carefully negotiated terms. Outside, a handful of photographers loitered with staged curiosity, ready to capture the moment the ruthless billionaire said, "I do" to the girl from the middle of nowhere. As they stepped out onto the courthouse steps, Dorian leaned in close, his hand finding the small of her back like it belonged there. "Smile," he murmured. "We're madly in love, remember?" Rowan gave him the expression he'd asked for, a perfect, practiced smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Oh, I must have missed the love memo." Something flickered across his face. Was it amusement? Regret? Whatever it was, it vanished quickly. "You do know," he said under his breath, "most women would kill to be where you are." "Most women," Rowan replied, her voice low and sharp, "haven't known the satisfaction of growing their own food." or the pride of building something with their own two hands. Click, flash, click. The cameras captured them two silhouettes pretending intimacy under a sky of skyscrapers. Later that day, Rowan stood in the grand foyer of Dorian's penthouse. Her modest suitcase sat at her feet like a misplaced memory, awkward and out of place among the marble floors and minimalist art. Outside the towering windows, the Manhattan skyline glistened like a constellation cold, unreachable, and nothing like the stars above Everwood Acres. "Miss Rodriguez will show you to your room," Dorian said, already tugging at his tie, eyes on his phone. "I have a conference call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. "My room?" Rowan asked, one brow lifting. "Separate accommodations," he replied flatly. "How scandalous, Mr. Vale." He looked up, pausing for half a breath. "Would you prefer alternatives, Mrs. Vale?" The name spoken aloud landed hard. It wasn't hers. It didn't fit. Not yet. "Separate rooms are fine," she said quickly, following the petite housekeeper down a hallway lined with abstract paintings that probably cost more than her father's tractor. Her suite. Yes. Suite was spacious and flawless, all soft grays and cool blues. It looked like a magazine cover, and it felt nothing like home. "Dinner is served at 7, Senora, Ms." Rodriguez said gently. "Mr. Vale has asked that you join him." When she was finally alone, Rowan sat on the edge of the pristine bed and ran her hands across the silk comforter. What had she done? The answer came with the chiming of a clock. 7 sharp. She found herself seated across from Dorian at a dining table long enough to host a wedding party. Just the two of them, 2 glasses, one carefully plated meal. "Wine?" he offered, already pouring deep red into crystal. "I'm more of a lemonade person," she said, though she accepted the glass anyway. He studied her over the rim of his own drink, eyes unreadable. "Tomorrow, my assistant will take you shopping. You'll need appropriate attire for the Wellington Gala." "What's wrong with my clothes?" Rowan challenged, though she already knew. Her denim, flannel, and sun-stained boots didn't belong in a room with senators and CEOs. "Nothing if you're milking cows," he replied, tone even. "Everything. If you're meeting the governor." Rowan stabbed her fork into the salmon without grace. "Do you always insult people when you're trying to help them?" Dorian paused, and then, to her surprise, he laughed. A low, real laugh. It was the first genuine sound she'd heard from him all day. What happened next caught her off guard. Dorian laughed, not the kind of smooth, curated laugh meant to charm a boardroom, but a real one, a sound that cracked through the stillness and changed the shape of his face, softer, younger, almost human. "Most people don't dare speak to me like that," he said, shaking his head with something close to awe. "It's oddly refreshing." Rowan leaned back, arms folded. "Well, you'll want to get used to it. Everwoods don't keep their thoughts to themselves." "I've noticed," he replied, eyes lingering on her like he was trying to read a language he hadn't learned to speak. Then more quietly, "What would you be doing right now if you weren't here?" The question caught her off balance, not because it was intrusive, but because it was real. "Thursday nights?" she said, thinking aloud. "I'd probably be in the kitchen, testing recipes. I was working on a farm-to-table cookbook before all of this." She waved vaguely around them. "Before I crashed into your life," Dorian finished for her. "Yes," she said softly. Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It simply was. Then, with surprising warmth, Dorian nodded toward the sleek, modern kitchen behind her. "You're welcome to use it. The place could use a little soul. Consider it repayment for the cookbook delay." Rowan blinked, genuinely surprised by the offer. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. From there, the conversation drifted to safer ground: the upcoming Wellington Gala, the expectations they were meant to meet, the story they'd agreed to sell to the world. And yet, all evening, Rowan caught him watching her with a gaze she couldn't quite decode. Later that night, in the stillness of her suite, she stood at the window, staring out at a skyline made of steel and electricity. The city sparkled below like a galaxy out of reach. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. "No matter whose name is on your mail, don't forget who you are." Across the penthouse, Dorian sat alone in his office, a closed portfolio before him, the development plans for Everwood Acres. They hadn't been touched in days. On his screen, a file glowed softly. Her background check. But it was more than a report. Now it was a portrait. Honors from culinary school. A restaurant job, left behind without complaint. Weekend cooking classes at the local community center. A photo her in a flour-stained apron, laughing as she helped children knead dough refused to be minimized. Something stirred in him. Not strategy, not ambition, something far more inconvenient. He picked up the phone. "Evelyn," he said, "put the Ashmore Valley project on hold." There was a pause on the other end. "May I ask why?" He stared at Rowan's photo, unable to look away. "Let's just say I'm exploring a different kind of investment." 2 weeks later, they stood side by side in the living room, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. Rowan wore a forest green gown that cost more than the entire harvest from their north field. Dorian's arm was draped across her waist with effortless precision. A photographer circled them like a hawk with a lens, praising their natural chemistry and asking for candid intimacy. "Whisper something," he urged Dorian. "Make her laugh." Dorian leaned in, his breath grazing her neck. "You look like you'd rather be ankle-deep in mud shoveling compost." Rowan's laugh escaped before she could stop it, genuine, sudden, unguarded. It lit up her entire face. Click, click, flash. The camera caught it all. To the world, it would look like a moment of newlywed joy. To them, it was something else. Unspoken, undefined, but no longer pretend. As soon as the last camera was packed away and the echo of shutter clicks faded, Rowan kicked off her heels like they were shackles and collapsed onto the velvet sofa. "Is it always like this?" she muttered, rubbing her aching feet. "People documenting every blink, every breath." "Welcome to my world," Dorian replied, loosening his tie. To her surprise, instead of disappearing into his office, he sat beside her close, but not too close. "You handled it well," he added. "I felt like a show pony," she grumbled. He glanced at her, then said quietly, "A remarkably beautiful one." And just like that, his expression shifted, as if he hadn't meant to let those words slip. Rowan turned her head, brows raised. "Was that part of our performance, Mr. Vale?" Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He answered it briefly, his voice clipped. When he hung up, his face had darkened. "Problem?" she asked. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, an involuntary gesture she was beginning to recognize as a rare moment of real frustration. "The Wellington Gala," he said. "We've been seated with the Crawfords." Rowan didn't need a background check to know what that meant. "An ex?" she guessed. Dorian nodded. "Rebecca Crawford, still bitter, also the daughter of my biggest competitor." Rowan sat forward slightly. "So, you'll need me to be extra convincing tomorrow night." He hesitated. "It would help," he admitted. Then, more quietly, "Rebecca and I, it wasn't like this." She raised an eyebrow. "Like this?" she echoed, teasing. "You mean full of passion and emotional fireworks?" He almost smiled. Almost. It was convenient, efficient. 2 business portfolios playing house. Rowan's tone softened. Well, at least we're honest about what this is. There's integrity in that, he said, not quite looking at her. Later that evening, the kitchen drew her in like a magnet. The sterile elegance of the penthouse had been suffocating her, but cooking creating grounded her. She moved on instinct, chopping, stirring, layering, losing herself in the rhythms she knew best. Her mother's lasagna recipe came alive beneath her hands. She didn't hear Dorian enter until his voice broke through the quiet. "That smells incredible." Rowan jumped, nearly dropping her spoon. "You scared me." He stood there, not in a suit, not as the untouchable billionaire, but in jeans and a simple gray shirt. His hair tousled, his expression soft. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, stepping closer. I followed the smell. He glanced around the kitchen like it was foreign territory. "I don't think this space has ever seen real cooking before," Rowan laughed. "That's a crime against architecture," she declared. "A kitchen should be the heart of a home." "Is that something your mother taught you?" he asked, quietly curious. The question stopped her. "Yes, actually. How did you know?" Dorian shrugged, but the flicker in his eyes said it wasn't a guess. "You mentioned she taught you to bake. And I saw her photo on your nightstand." His attention to something so small, so personal, stirred something unexpected in her. "She passed last year," Rowan said softly. "Cancer. I'm sorry," he murmured, and this time there was no calculation in his voice. "My mother died when I was 12. Heart failure." The space between them shifted. They weren't business partners or strategic spouses. For that one fragile moment, they were just two people. Two people who had lost something they couldn't get back. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Rowan asked suddenly, the words surprising her, even as they left her lips. "There's plenty." That night, they didn't eat at the long, cold dining table. They sat at the kitchen island, sharing lasagna, a bottle of wine, and without meaning to pieces of themselves, they hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. They lingered in the kitchen long after the plates had been cleared, their glasses half full with the last of the wine. For the first time, the silence between them felt companionable, almost intimate. Dorian spoke first. He told her about his father, how he'd grown up learning that emotions were liabilities, not language. About the business empire he'd built, not from a dream, but from the rubble of his father's collapse. It was less a legacy, more a rebellion. Rowan listened quietly, then shared her own stories of golden harvests and community dinners, of long days in the fields and longer nights perfecting recipes, of the cookbook she never got to finish. They stood at the sink together, rinsing dishes like they'd done it 100 times, and yet the moment felt utterly surreal. "Why real estate?" she asked gently. "Of all the things a billionaire could do?" Dorian paused. His gaze dropped to the plate in his hands as if the answer might surface in the soap and water. "I rebuild things," he said at last. "Things that are broken, forgotten, failing. I give them worth again." Rowan turned to face him fully. "So, is that what this is? Our farm? Another project to fix?" She didn't raise her voice, but the question carried weight. He met her eyes. "Wasn't it?" he asked quietly. "Your father was drowning in debt." She held his gaze. "Some things," she said, "don't need to be transformed. Some things are already worth more than you can measure." Something shifted in Dorian's expression, a shadow of recognition, or memory, or regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Not in my experience," he murmured. The next morning, as Rowan stood in front of the mirror, getting ready for the Wellington Gala, a small box arrived on her dresser. Inside was a delicate emerald necklace, glimmering like morning dew, perfectly matched to the gown Evelyn had chosen for her. A folded note sat beside it. In Dorian's precise handwriting, every worthy performance deserves proper props. Thank you for your honesty. She touched the cool stone to her collarbone and stared at her reflection. Why, she wondered, was her heart racing at the thought of walking into a ballroom on his arm? And why, just for a fleeting second, did the idea of returning to the farm in 10 months feel like a loss? Across the penthouse, Dorian sat at his desk, a closed file untouched before him. On his screen, a new email awaited approval, final authorization for the Ashmore Valley development. He hovered over the send button, then deleted the draft again. He wasn't ready to admit it, not even to himself. But somewhere between obligation and facade, between staged photos and quiet kitchen conversations, Rowan Everwood had become something more than a contract, and that scared him more than any corporate rival ever could. The Wellington Gala turned the Metropolitan Museum into a palace of glass and gold. Every chandelier shimmered. Every guest sparkled. Power and money floated through the air like perfume. Rowan stepped from the limousine, Dorian's hand resting lightly at her back. Flashbulbs exploded in her face, but she kept her eyes forward, channeling the version of herself they all expected to see, the woman who belonged beside him. Tonight, Dorian murmured, as they moved through the press line, is more than just optics. The Crawford merger is balancing on a thread. Marcus will be watching for cracks. So I'm your decoy, and your defense, Rowan whispered back. All at once. Bosa, he replied. Then after a beat, added, but you're more than that. There was something in his voice, soft, unsure, that made her heartbeat stutter. Inside, the room pulsed with champagne and violin music. Celebrities brushed past senators. Art glowed on the walls. Crystal glasses chimed like wind chimes in a storm. Rowan accepted a flute of champagne, grateful for something to hold on to. Then she heard it. Dorian. What a surprise. A woman in crimson approached, all curves and calculation. Her smile was razor sharp. And this, she said, turning to Rowan, must be the farm girl everyone's whispering about, came the voice like silk hiding steel. Dorian's arm tightened gently around Rowan's waist, his smile razor sharp. Rebecca, meet my wife, Rowan Vale. Rowan turned to face the woman, whose perfume arrived before her words. Rebecca Crawford, pristine in crimson silk, extended a hand with polished fingers that spoke more of power than welcome. Charmed, I'm sure. Such a whirlwind, this romance of yours, she said, eyes glittering. One might even call it impulsive. Rowan took her hand without hesitation, met her gaze without blinking. When you know, she replied smoothly. Some connections don't follow a business plan. They just happen. The jab landed, and Rebecca's smile faltered just enough for Rowan to see the flicker beneath. How quaint, Rebecca murmured. Her voice dipped in disdain. Dorian never used to do spontaneity. He was always methodical, strategic. She turned to Dorian, lips curling. Maybe you finally found the right muse. Before Dorian could respond, Rebecca's expression shifted, calculating. Daddy's looking forward to the meeting next week. Though he was surprised you're not bringing Evelyn. Second thoughts about the downtown deal? Rowan noticed Dorian's jaw tighten, but before he could answer, another figure stepped into their circle. Marcus Crawford, impeccable, charming, dangerous. Dorian, he said, with effortless warmth, and the new Mrs. Vale, the woman who somehow managed to tame Manhattan's most unbreakable man. The group launched into a volley of business-speak mergers, asset shifts, investor trust. Rowan listened politely, but the language was foreign, the tone sterile. She smiled where appropriate, nodded on cue, but her breath felt thin. She slipped away when no one was looking, drawn toward a balcony framed by ivy and stars. The city below glittered like a restless ocean. Escaping the sharks? A voice asked gently. Rowan turned. A woman in midnight blue stood at the railing, her silver hair swept into a graceful knot. Her eyes were bright with wit and kindness. "Is it that obvious?" Rowan asked, managing a smile, only to someone who's been swimming with them for 4 decades. She extended a hand. "Eleanor Wellington." Rowan blinked. "As in the Wellington Gala? My late husband started the foundation. I keep the legacy warm." She leaned in. "And you're the farmer's daughter, who's managed to spin Mr. Vale off axis." Rowan's cheeks flushed. "I'm not sure that's true. Everyone's talking," Eleanor said with amusement. "But you don't seem like his usual type." "What's his type?" "Polished, ruthless, carbon copies of himself." Rowan laughed, a little breathless. "And you think I'm not?" "No. I think you're the first one he doesn't have to pretend with." Her voice softened. "He's different around you. Even Marcus noticed. Said Dorian's gone soft." Rowan's smile faded. "He said that?" "This afternoon," Eleanor nodded. "Apparently, Dorian backed out of the Riverside development. Said he's exploring more community-focused alternatives. Nearly gave Marcus a heart attack." Rowan stared out over the city, wind tugging at her earrings. What could have changed his mind? Before she could finish the thought, Dorian appeared at the doorway, scanning the crowd until his eyes found hers. Relief softened his face. "There you are," he said, crossing to her with quick strides. "I've been looking everywhere." He nodded respectfully to Eleanor. "Mrs. Wellington, I see you found my favorite corner," Eleanor said with a wink. "And my favorite surprise of the evening." Rowan smiled, but Dorian's expression had grown serious. "We need to go," he said, his voice low. "What happened?" "There's been a fire. One of the barns." Rowan's heart dropped. "Is my dad?" "He's fine. It's contained. But we need to leave now." Everything else vanished: gowns, music, whispered politics. Rowan was already moving, heels clicking sharply across a marble. The world they'd stepped into began to dissolve behind them. The helicopter waiting on the rooftop felt too slow, too far. And as it lifted into the night sky, Rowan clutched the seat's edge, eyes on the darkness below. Dorian sat beside her, uncharacteristically quiet. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't try to fill the silence. He simply reached for her hand. And for once, it wasn't about appearances. It was about being there. Dorian had made the call before Rowan even finished asking. Everything about him, the man of steel and strategy, had vanished, replaced by something rawer, urgent, human. He held her hand the entire flight, not for show, not for photos, but simply because she needed him to. And he needed to. They arrived to smoke still lingering in the air, the scent of wet ash clinging to every breath. Silas Everwood stood at the center of it all, boots planted in the mud, hair soaked with sweat, soot streaking his face. He was directing volunteers like a general in the final stretch of battle, his hands on a water pump, his eyes sharp. "Dad!" Rowan ran to him without thinking, the hem of her gown dragging through the dirt. She flung her arms around him. "I'm all right, sweetheart," he murmured, holding her tightly. "Just an old barn, some hay, nothing we can't replace." Silas looked past her, then, and saw him. Dorian, still in his tuxedo, now stained with smoke and sweat. He stood silently, eyes on the wreckage. "Didn't expect to see you here?" "Mr. Vale," Silas said, the edge in his voice still intact. "Dorian," he replied quietly, already rolling up his sleeves. "Tell me where I'm needed." And then, without ceremony, the billionaire disappeared into the chaos, passing buckets, lifting charred beams, taking orders without complaint. Rowan had changed into jeans and boots, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. Throughout the night, she kept catching glimpses of him covered in ash, sweat darkening his collar, his hands blistered but never pausing. Dawn arrived slow and pale, casting long shadows over the smoking ruins. And in that light, she found him on the porch steps, arms resting on his knees, head bowed. He looked utterly spent, utterly real. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. She handed him a chipped mug, her mother's favorite. He accepted it, their fingers brushing, lingering. "I've called in crews," he said, staring into the steam. "They'll be here Monday. We'll rebuild. Stronger than before. You didn't have to do that." I wanted to. When their eyes met, there was no armor left between them. Only two people, bare and exhausted, and somehow closer than they'd ever meant to be. "Eleanor told me she spoke to you," Rowan said quietly. Dorian nodded, sipping the coffee slowly. "I turned down the Riverside deal." Rowan's breath caught. Why? He didn't look at her. It didn't feel right anymore. Because of this? He finally turned toward Siwab. "Because of you." The honesty in his voice landed between them like a spark in dry grass. Dangerous. Undeniable. "I don't understand what's happening," she confessed. "This was supposed to be simple. Strategic. A transaction." Dorian gave a hollow laugh. "Nothing's been simple since the moment you stood on that porch and told me no." Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand, not as an act, not for the cameras, but because he wanted to. Their fingers intertwined, really intertwined, for the first time. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice rough, exhausted, and utterly sincere. As the sun rose over Ashmore Valley, bathing the land in light that felt both ancient and new, Dorian Vale finally spoke the truth he'd been carrying. "My mother," he began, barely above a whisper, "grew up on this farm." Rowan's breath caught in her throat. "She was your father's cousin," he continued. "She left when she was young and never came back." And just like that, the ground beneath them shifted again, not from fire, but from revelation. Rowan stared at him, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "What?" Dorian kept his eyes on the fields, now glowing golden in the early sun. "Margaret Everwood," he said softly. "She was your grandfather's niece, your dad's cousin. She left when she was 18, married my father against the family's wishes." A shadow moved behind them. Silas had come to the doorway, his expression worn, his eyes distant. "You knew," Rowan said, her voice trembling. Dorian nodded, then finally turned to face the older man. "I didn't know when I first came. I only found out after she passed. She left behind a box of letters, ones she never sent. Some were to you," he nodded at Silas. "Some to Rowan." Rowan's thoughts spiraled. Bits of half-remembered stories, names that had floated through family conversations like whispers, now clicked into place. "Dad, is that true?" she asked. Silas moved slowly to the porch chair, as if the weight of the past had just tripled. "She was like a sister to me," he said, his voice thick with memory. "When she left with Richard Vale, no one knew what to think. My uncle called him a con man, full of big city promises. It tore our family in two. I tried to keep in touch," Dorian said, quietly, "but my father isolated her. Controlled everything who she saw, who she could speak to. It wasn't until after he drank himself to death that she started writing those letters," he added. "By then, she was already sick." Rowan's heart clenched. "So when you came here, threatening to take the farm—" "I didn't come to take it," Dorian said softly. "Not really. I came to understand it. To see what could possibly mean so much it tore a family apart." He looked up, his voice unguarded. "She spent her final days staring at old photographs of this place. The trees, the barn, the porch. She called it the only place she was ever really free." Silas's jaw tightened. "And the debt? Was it real?" "Yes," Dorian said. "Very real. The bank was happy to offload it. But I told myself it was just business. Another acquisition, another deal." Rowan studied him. "Until it wasn't," she said quietly. He nodded. "Until you." There was no dramatic pause, just truth, laid bare in the quiet morning. Suddenly, the story she used to tell about a place where people valued the earth and each other, they weren't fairy tales anymore. It changed everything, not just what had happened over the past few months, but how they saw each other. Rowan looked at him and saw not the man who once threatened her family, but someone who had been just as lost, searching for something he'd never had a name for. "Why didn't you tell us?" she whispered. "Why not start with the truth?" "Because I didn't know how," he admitted. "I thought I had to be who my father raised me to be, ruthless, detached. Weakness was to be exploited, not protected." Silas stood suddenly, disappeared into the house, and returned with something wrapped in linen and dust. "She gave me this," he said, placing the old photo album in Rowan's lap. "The day I left for college, said someone should remember what joy looked like." The three of them huddled together, flipping through time. Photos of Margaret filled the pages laughing, barefoot in the fields, flower on her cheeks, holding a young Silas in a headlock by the creek. Dorian reached out, fingertips brushing over a photo. A girl with his eyes and Rowan's smile, standing in front of the same barn that now lay half-burned and soon to be rebuilt. "She was happy here," he whispered. Silas nodded. "She was. We all were." 3 months later, Rowan stood in a kitchen that gleamed with marble and brass, though the smell of rosemary and garlic still made it feel like home. No, not his kitchen anymore, she reminded herself with a quiet smile. Theirs. She placed the final sprigs of thyme on the lamb roast. In the next room, Silas laughed at something Dorian had said, something about tractors and stock options. The rebuilt barn at Ashmore Valley had been transformed into a teaching kitchen. Every weekend, Rowan held cooking classes for the community. Her mother's recipes lived again in the hands of children and elders alike. Everything had changed, and somehow everything had come full circle. Silas looked at Dorian, eyes soft with something that resembled pride, and maybe a touch of disbelief. "You know," he said, voice warm with reflection, "when you first rolled up here in that expensive car, I thought you were the worst thing that could have happened to this family." He paused, letting the memory settle. "But now?" He smiled, extending a hand. "Now I think some things fall into place exactly the way they're meant to, even if they don't go according to plan." Dorian grasped his hand firmly. "Welcome to the family, son. This time for real." And so, the seasons turned. Spring softened into summer. Autumn painted the valley in gold. Winter brought quiet. Then life began again. Ashmore Valley, once marked for loss, now pulsed with renewal. The land thrived richer than before, its soil nourished by modern knowledge and old wisdom entwined. Under Rowan's vision and Dorian's stewardship, the farm became more than a piece of land. It became a sanctuary. They bought back neighboring properties, protecting them from development, and Dorian, yes, the Dorian Vale was often seen in muddy boots, hammering fence posts or planting fruit trees beside the man who once doubted him. People stopped whispering. They started nodding in quiet respect. And when asked, because they always asked, Rowan would just smile and say, "Some investments can't be measured in profit. Only in the way they fill an empty heart, in the way they mend old wounds and give new roots a place to grow." The farmhouse porch once again became a gathering place. Laughter replaced tension. Meals stretched long into twilight. The photo album sat open more often than not, adding pages instead of closing chapters. And in that place, stitched together by choice, forgiveness, and love, something rare had taken root. A family. Not perfect, but whole. And the land remembered. Because land always does. Sometimes what begins as a contract becomes a covenant. Not signed in ink, but in laughter, shared labor, and love. And sometimes, the best endings are really just beautiful beginnings. Thank you for walking this journey with us. From the first page to the final scene, your presence has meant more than words can say. Stories like this one aren't just about love or family or finding home. They're about connection, about the quiet, powerful way we recognize ourselves in each other. If this story brought you warmth, reflection, or even just a moment of stillness, then it has done what it was meant to do. Thank you for letting us into your day, your heart, your thoughts. And wherever you are, may your roots grow deep, your heart stay open, and your own story continue to bloom. Until next time, with all our gratitude, shining stories.